Hey everyone, welcome. We are so excited to have you all here. If you want to, as you're joining us, throw in your chat, where are you from? Are you excited to be here? Make sure that your to section is to panelists and attendees so that you can talk with other people as well. My name is Katie Ray. I am coming from Fort Worth, Texas, and we've got fabulous Tito Bohrt here. And here you're coming from Bolivia. So
I
it's
am.
beautiful there, right? Nice, perfect beach weather, I assume.
It is. I'm up in the mountains. Actually, I'm on the west coast of Bolivia, up in the Andes.
Oh, wow.
So it is gorgeous. But yeah, you for those who have seen me do webinars in the past, you'll see that the background today is quite different than the usual one. So yeah, I'm joining remotely.
So in the Andes, I'm not a history person. Barely passed in middle school. I don't even think I took much in high school or really in college. Is there good hiking? I'm gonna assume.
Yeah,
Pretty.
there is. Yeah, I'm like an hour away from like a big mountain with like lots of snow. There's no skiing though. I don't know. It's a fun place to be. I grew up here. A lot of people don't know that. I was born and raised in Bolivia. And I'm excited about this conversation. It should be a fun one. We're gonna talk about topics that uh I usually don't talk to too many people about. I reserve these more for when I'm meeting CROs or VPs of sales or CEOs at fast growing companies where we're talking about really what are the revenue metrics that you need to hit to grow fast and how do you make your board of directors happy. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit uncommon compared to yeah to what
The
I usually
normal
talk about, which is
SDR shtick.
SDRs. Yeah, so should be fun.
Well, I'm excited. Everyone that's here, I'm about to throw up a poll for y'all. We want to know, who are you? Are you an SDR? Are you a director, manager? We've got some C levels in there. So we can really tailor what we're going to be talking about today. Yeah, I'm really excited because as someone who's never been in like real leadership, I'm excited to learn to figure out how do we make what we're doing a rocket ship? How do we grow? So this is going to be really fun today. And we've got a lot of interactivity. The biggest thing for today is we want to make sure that you're getting what you want out of this. Throw your questions in the bottom Q&A box or in the chat. I'll be monitoring both, and we can really get into, what do you guys want to know? What's important to you? What questions do you have? Have you thought about this? Have you not thought about this? We're really going to get into that here in just a minute. So,
Yeah, should be fun. And for me, it's important to know like the split of people here. How many are SDRs versus managers, directors, VPs, C levels, and the main reason for that is this call can go in different directions. We can talk about like how do you as an SDR know if you are running a profitable role,
mm,
right? Like sometimes in your role as an SDR, you're just getting your meetings, like doing the motions, and you don't know if you're going to get cut off from the team or the team is going to grow or shrink or be completely like eliminated. And if we talk about the revenue metrics that you need to hit and you have visibility into CRM, you will know how your board of directors or C level and VP are thinking about the team
mm,
and if they're going to grow it or not, right? And the same team is on the opposite side. Like if it's a bunch of C levels and VPs that don't know what other revenue metrics they need to hit, they might like cut off the team when it was actually working, or they might continue running a team that isn't really working. And those are big problems because obviously, if you're cutting off a team that was working, it's a huge cost or opportunity cost of like doing a great job. And the opposite is also true. If you're letting it run, even though it's not working for too long, you might be burning too much cash. So it's really important to understand, the financial side of things. How do we think about those teams producing enough revenue, and what are the metrics we need to hit in order to justify that?
absolutely. I love it. I love it. So we're going to stop the poll here. I know some people are still coming on. I know we've got some more people coming later on. We've got, luckily, a lot of messages. People are excited to be here. It looks like we kind of have an even split of everyone. We've got, I mean, this is crazy. I don't think we've ever had like this much of an equal split of attendees that have voted. So this is great. But this is going to be really great for those of you who are currently individual contributors, figuring out what are some warning signs you should look for either positive or negative, whether your team will probably be growing or it may not be, for your managers and directors as you're planning out your teams, figuring out when to increase headcount, when to not, and then for our VPs and C levels who are really looking at the visionary big picture side, so being able to take some takeaways from there. So we're just gonna get started here real quick. My name is Katie Ray. I am the Community Events and Engagement Manager at Sales Hacker. We're so excited to bring you this open discussion with Tito today. Like we've mentioned before, we've got a huge breadth of discussions planned. And really, the way that this is going to be as enjoyable for all of you is if you look at the bottom bar of your Zoom, you've got your little raise hand and you've got your little Q&A box. Throw any and every question that you possibly have into this Q&A box. Myself and Tito are going to be monitoring it. Same thing with the chat box. If you want to toss them in there, you're welcome to as well. But you're here because you've got questions. Ask them here. We're going to be going through a great discussion, but we really want your involvement so you can take home some actual practical advice to your team and really help build where you need to. So don't forget, throw it in there. Make sure your chat is changed to panelists and attendees. I'll let Tito introduce himself, even though he doesn't need an intro. We all know who this fabulous guy is. But I'll let you introduce yourself and then we can get started. How does that sound?
That sounds awesome. So hi everybody, I'm Tito Bohrt. I don't like doing long intros, so if you enjoy the discussion today, or if you enjoy the information I'm sharing, just connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn. I've been running sales development teams for 9 years now, and I'm also an angel investor, so I'm very well versed on what are the metrics we need to hit in order to grow stuff, and how board of directors kind of like think about SaaS company growth. So yeah, it's going to be my pleasure to share with you some data and metrics and probably accelerate your knowledge in this area, so that you can all be a more informed SaaS sellers as well. I assume the majority of people here are SaaS. It's really where we're going to focus the majority of the time. Um, but yeah, so excited to get started. And Kitty, if you want, I can just start probably with a next poll question. I want to see what people think about that one, and then I'll share the answer and I'll explain a little bit about the SaaS models. After that, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into marketing versus sales expenses. How do we account for those? And then how do we split the teams between marketing, sales, sales development, and how do we, as leaders or even as reps, start understanding the revenue models that our companies are running in order to maximize success? And how do we skyrocket? How do we become the next Salesforce or a Slack or Okta, or any of these big companies that have accelerated and become unicorns and IPO'd this quickly? So yeah.
Perfect. And you know what's so cool too, just before we get into that? IPOs, for those of you who aren't paying too much attention to that, you 100% should. I can't remember the stat, and Tito, you may know it more in depth than I, but I think it's like IPOs for tech companies have grown, what, like 60% in the past 2 years? Or it's something crazy, but you're going to be seeing companies, excuse me, going public all over the place the next year. So I'm launching our first poll, and I'll let you kind of dive into this.
Yeah, it's exciting. SaaS is obviously the new model, right?
Mhm.
We're seeing how it's taking over. It's easier to buy SaaS because it's less expensive than buying a multi-year solution or an on-premise solution. Most of SaaS is obviously cloud, because it's as a service and it's
Mhm.
accessible anywhere. Um, but yeah, a lot of people don't understand, like, how do you make money on SaaS, and why are companies raising like so many millions of dollars? Do you really need all that money? So we'll start with our first poll question, which is, what does the average SaaS company spend to acquire $100,000 worth of net new ARR? ARR is annual recurrent revenue. For those that aren't super familiar, it's the equivalent of ACV when you aggregate all your ACVs, annual contract values, across all your clients. If you only take the portion that is recurrent, aka uh, the subscription revenue rather than any services, um, how much could you spend to acquire $100,000 worth of revenue? We'll give people, what, 10 more seconds to
Yeah.
participate.
Yep.
Don't Google the answer, people. Don't cheat. I think this is an easy one to just pick a number, right? Like, what makes sense to you guys? $100,000 of revenue. How much can you spend?
And for those of us who haven't been in leadership roles, just see what sounds good.
Yeah, guess. Please guess, because if there's no answers, I don't know what to educate on. So, but if you guess, even if you guess wrong, that's totally fine. So, 3, 2, 1. I think we can close it.
Here are the results.
There
Wow.
you go. Look at that. So, I don't know. Only hosts can see the results, I assume, or can everybody see this, Katie?
Everyone can see it. We can all see the results right now. Yep.
Everyone can see it. So most people are 35% of people are guessing you can spend only $47,000 to acquire 100K worth of revenue. There's people in the 29K camp and 72. There's very few people up there in the 110, 134. I'm going to give you the answer. I'm going to share screens. I'm going to see what the answer is, and I know it's going to shock you because it's much higher than you actually think it is. Oh, it says I cannot screen share. Maybe you need to
Here,
let me do that.
there you go. You should be good.
Good now. Cool. So this stat here at the bottom comes from David Skok. He is from Matrix Partners, one of the well-known venture capital firms in the nation. This is data from 2018. It's only gone worse in 2019 and 2020. But what it says is that to acquire net new customer, the customer acquisition cost ratio is $1.34. What that means is that to acquire a contract of $100,000, a company can spend in sales and marketing $134,000. Most people, and when I heard this stat first, I was like, how does that make sense? How am I going to pay my sales and marketing team $134,000 to get a contract worth $100,000? Well, here's the thing: to retain the customer, it's almost free. You don't really pay to retain a customer. I've been a customer of companies like ZoomInfo and Outreach for years. Every year, ZoomInfo comes back to me. It's like, oh, Tito, here's another $120,000 you got to pay us this year. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I still need this software. Check, paid. Next year, $120,000, check, paid. So you can spend $134,000 to acquire it because the first year, yes, the customer is going to pay you 100. The next year, it's another 100, and the next year is another 100. And actually, on average, companies grow their customer revenue for the same customers about 7%. So that same customer will pay $100,000 this year, 107 next year, and about 115 the year after. So it continues to grow. It's a very interesting stat. I'm going to stop sharing screen so we can get back to just a conversation. Now, let's talk about like how is that split. So we have another poll question here. The $134,000 being spent here is only between sales and marketing. This is not counting engineering. It's not counting anything else. Kitty, let's put
Poll is
our
going.
final poll question. Here is the approximate percentage split between expenses in sales and marketing. People, where do you think companies are spending more money? Sales or marketing? And what is the split between these two?
Hey, Tito, while this is going, we've got a question from Monica, and she's curious about the churn rate with the stats that you were just mentioning. Is the churn rate accounted for in those numbers?
Remember that we're looking at industry average data, right? So I think revenue wise, churn is negative, is what I was saying, right? So if you right now have 10 customers paying $100,000 or 100 customers paying $100,000, by next year, sure, maybe 2 or 3 will churn or 5% will churn. However, the other 95 that are renewing at maybe 10% more cost per year. They're increasing their licenses. They're doing other stuff. So in SaaS, the net churn is actually negative, which means that rather than churning, aka losing clientele, they're increasing their revenue with the same clients, not accounting for net new. What I was just showing is the cost of net new customer. What that means is, what are my cost of salaries plus office space plus internet plus tools plus whatever else for sales and marketing. This includes every ad, every conference, every webinar, everything that people throw money at. I know like Sales Hacker is a good example. Like a lot of companies pay to do webinars. I'm one of the lucky ones that gets invited. Hopefully because I share good information with people. But But yeah, so when you think about those $134,000 cost, where do people think are? We can close the poll now. Where do people think sales and marketing expenses are going? What's taking a bigger portion? Cool. Yeah, people got it right. Here, like the actual split is about 70-30, truly. A lot of people put the 60-40 cap or 70-30 cap. We have about 71% of the attendees there. There's a few that were going more for sales than marketing. And it is true. I want to show a graph though that showcases a little bit more about how to think about those expenses, because a lot of people, especially me being a sales development expert, they ask me, Tito, is sales development marketing or sales? And when I look at my budgets, is this a marketing budget or is this a sales budget? And do you report to sales or marketing? And there's always this confusion. So I like to believe that sales development is a marketing expense, not a sales expense. And the reason I call it a marketing expense is I consider a sales expense anything that is actually closing deals, right? Like your sales reps and their tools and like the motions and the training that go from I'm having a conversation with you all the way to negotiating a contract and closing a deal. That I consider sales. Anything that is like you've never heard of me to we're having a meeting, I consider that marketing. And definitely sales development is on the second cap. So when you look at your total cost of sales and marketing, uh, this is how I like to think about it, or this is what I like to kind of like share with people, right? The split between marketing, sales development, and sales, and where you put sales development in between those, I think works this way. If you're working inbound leads, those leads are clearly going to be very marketing oriented and pretty expensive in terms of marketing. Getting a demo request or a contact us form filled up by a potential client that is in your ICP, I would attribute most, if not all of that cost purely to the marketing team, right? And then the sales development portion is just, hey, somebody sent a demo request, is a target account, let's just schedule it. This is your inbound SDR. I don't think a lot of companies need big inbound SDR teams to handle, inbound requests. Then what you have next is a little bit colder, which is what I called warm leads through lead scoring, right? Somebody who has attended 7 webinars, has downloaded 3 white papers, has seen 2 case
Mhm.
studies. And now, obviously, the marketing team has done a lot of the effort, and the sales development team still needs to call, find phone numbers, get the right information, and convince them to take a meeting. Because even though they've been consuming information, they haven't requested a meeting, right? And you can go down the list. Lukewarm leads, this is suspects. These are like people who have attended maybe one webinar or done one little thing here. They haven't been lead scored into high intent. They're just touching the surface. Probably those people only have your logo awareness and some sort of product awareness, but they don't have positioning awareness. Positioning awareness comes once you've like probably lead scored much more. You've looked at a lot of content from one same company. And then finally, you have the cold leads, which are like pretty much, sales development only. Like it's literally you go on Zoom Info, you download a list of leads and double verify them with LinkedIn and start outbound calling. So the split is going to be much more the sales development portion of things, and really, sure, you can add some sort of marketing here in case there's some logo awareness if you're a big company, right? If you're Salesforce and you're calling, you can never say that there's leads that are like completely cold, because let's be honest, almost everybody knows Salesforce. But if you are a startup, if you're like 2 million in revenue, 5 million in revenue, 10 million in revenue, even if you're a series A, B, or C, if you're not a category leader, if you're not like a Zoom Info, an Outreach, or a Salesforce, or one of those companies, truly the costs are a little bit different. So I'll stop there. What we're going to dive deeper into now is, okay, now that we know the cost split across leads, and now that we know how much we can spend, how do I know as an SDR, or how do I know as a leader that my sales team and SDR functions are working properly? Before that, I'm happy to take a few more questions or comments if they're coming via the Q&A.
Yeah. Yeah, what kind of backing up a little bit as we talked about SDRs really falling under marketing. And I know for many people, it's still a very, I don't want to say shocking because it shouldn't be shocking, but it's still a very new idea. I know for myself, I thought it was the weirdest thing whenever I was brought into marketing as an SDR. But then I had a great manager and it made sense and she walked us through it. But here's a question, and I haven't thought about this role falling under sales enablement, but would or could an SDR role fall under sales enablement, and what would an argument be for that?
Yeah. So I think that this discussion is kind of funny because when you actually step out of it and you look at the big picture, people asking if sales development should fall under sales or marketing is the same question that, like, I could reverse that. I could ask you, should sales report to marketing or should sales report to sales development? And you
Mm,
would tell me, Tito, are you crazy? Sales, it's its own department. And like that's my same argument. I'm like, sales development shouldn't report to marketing or shouldn't report to sales. You need leadership that really understands this motion itself. Sales development is a very like important uh, department within a company, especially now in SaaS software sales, and it should be its own department. And
yeah.
now in the early days, it's really hard. If you have two SDRs, well, you don't have enough to have a VP of sales development and a sales development manager and sales development ops. So now those two reps need to be either embedded under marketing or sales, and I would say they need to report to whoever has experience with it, like whoever is good at writing good sales development copy, which is very different from marketing copy. Whoever is good at like cold calling, whoever is good at like opening accounts, and that might be just the SDRs are just working alongside the AEs, right?
Mhm.
Um, can it be under sales enablement? I don't know. If you're a sales enablement leader before, worked at a company that had sales development and it had a strong team and they know the motions of cold calling and they have a lot of documentation on how to build it, possibly yes. So in the early days, I don't mind. I think later on, sales development definitely has to be its own department, and I suspect we're going to see many more VPs of sales development or chief sales development officers um, coming up in companies, especially as more companies continue to do more outbound. 2020 has changed things dramatically, where there's less events or no events at this point, and therefore the budgets for, hey, we're going to spend $300,000 at Dreamforce.
Mhm.
Like, okay, what do we do with this $300,000? Okay, let's do 3 webinars, 5 webinars. And what you realize is like doing 5 webinars doesn't get you 5 times as many leads as doing one webinar.
Mhm.
It's a lot of the same people coming to many webinars. Sure, sometimes there's not a perfect overlap, but 5 webinars might bring you the value of like 3 times one webinar. So
Yeah.
there's the returns kind of like start stalling. The
Yeah.
only area where your returns are perfectly linear, and like you double your investment, you double your amount of leads, is if you do very tactical sales development. Where like let's say you have 1,500 target accounts, you have one SDR, you only give him 100 accounts, and he books 5 meetings. Well, guess what? If you had two SDRs, you could give the other guy a different set of 100 target accounts, and they would get another 5 meetings. And therefore, that scales linearly, right? Up to a point. Again, if you have 50 SDRs and you hire number 51, they're probably not going to scale linearly because now there's too many and your market's saturated. But in the early days, it works really, really well.
Gotcha. And one of the questions we have is, where does RevOps fit in this? And I think this is a great question, because this idea of revenue operations is really blossoming in the past year and a half and is going to continue. So I'm curious, where do you think RevOps fits in relationship to these teams?
I think RevOps is an overlay, right? Like before we had marketing ops and sales ops, and now it's become RevOps. I think RevOps just helps every part of the company. We have a you know RevOps team internally at AltiSales too. They're working with our data researchers to improve how we do data research, and they work with sales development and improve sales development motions, and do good sales development leadership and how to improve sales development. So I think RevOps is going to work. It's going to take a bunch of different projects and try to find further efficiencies to maximize revenue. So I know we're having lots of questions coming through. I'm going to try to answer these quickly
Okay.
because we don't have previous data. Reduce the marketing budget. Okay, so there's a question on articles or studies on how to assess the impact of marketing costs on sales revenue. Um, I think that, like, as a rule of thumb, the big number you got to keep in mind is to get $100,000 worth of revenue, you can spend 134K worth of expenses. And bear in mind, this doesn't mean $134,000 worth of like webinars, right? In order to get $100,000 worth of sales. This is sales and marketing expenses. So this means every salary for every sales rep, all the commissions, all the taxes, benefits, insurance, office space, tools. If you're a CMO, your salary's put it in there too. So you're going to start at the baseline. You're going to look at your team. You're going to say, I have 7 people in the marketing team. Our total salaries are $1 million. At taxes and benefits, we're 1.5 million. Okay, sales team, how many do we have? What's their base salary? What's their taxes and expense? Blah, blah. And then at the end of the day, you gotta through that at least like plan to hit about 100K for every 134K that you have in expenses. So yeah, that's the best thing I can point you to. I know a lot of companies are having a lot of budgets cut, and you got to become a little bit more efficient and tactical in how you do things. And again, that's where I recommend really sales development picking up, because that is a little bit more linear. Trade shows, webinars, case studies, things that you build, the 10th case study is not going to bring you as many customers as the first case study. The 17th webinar is not going to bring you as many net new leads as the first webinar. So in marketing, many times you got to do a little bit of everything in order to cast a wider net. While in sales development, you can really go pick your targets. And if I'm building a sales development team, I first haven't trained a little bit with mid-market, but as soon as they have a tenure of 3 to 5 months, I start throwing them into a little bit more enterprisey deals if you're able. And when I talk about mid-market enterprise, I mean for your segment, right? If your average deal size goes from 20K to 80K, start your SDRs hunting after the 20K deals, out of which there might be hundreds of target accounts or thousands or tens of thousands of target accounts. And then as they get more tenured, try to move them up the chain and start hunting for those 60, 80, 100K deals. And this is for any range. I know companies that go from 20 to 80. I know companies that minimum deal size is 150K and they go to 20 million. Start your SDRs on the lower end and start moving them up later on.
Perfect. Do you want to just keep going down the questions?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer 2 more questions, and then we're gonna dive deeper into how do you, as an SDR, look at your kind of like your revenue. So, how many prospective accounts should an SDR have? How long does SDR work these prospective accounts? Okay, so this is a really good question from Paul. He's asking how many accounts should I assign to my SDR, and then the question is also when do you give him net new accounts? Because if I have an SDR and I get 100 accounts, how long can I work him? Should I work him for a week, for a month, for a year? Like when do I get new target accounts? And I think that assigning people target accounts defeats the purpose of sales engagement, right? So if I have outreach, what the promise of outreach is, hey, your SDR team isn't working all the leads properly. What you should do is every lead should have the same experience. You can A/B test a lot of emails, and everybody's going to get a 12-step cadence of 5 emails, 5 calls, and 2 LinkedIn touches, and we're going to perfect that flow so we maximize the chances of any lead converting. Now, if you give me 100 accounts and I find 5 leads per account, I have 500 leads, and I've run my sequence for all my 500 leads, and I still have 3 weeks before I get more target accounts, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to continue to email blast the hell out of these because I don't know what else to do. I don't have enough target accounts to continue my sequence or to sequence new people. The opposite is also true. What if you give me 1,000 accounts and you only give me a month, and then I'm going to get another 1,000 accounts next month? What does that encourage me to do? Well, I'm going to eliminate a bunch of call steps. I'm just going to start email blasting the hell out of people. So I'm either going to overwork some leads and annoy them, or I'm going to underwork some leads or having to email blast or personalize less, and I'm going to destroy them. The way we work is we have a list of all the target accounts, and we build this carefully, literally. Like, we make sure that we get feedback from the reps on what accounts are good or bad, and we take them out of the list and we bring new ones in. So imagine you sell to companies that are advertising on Facebook. Cool. You find a list of 7,000 target accounts. You have, or let's call it 8,000 target accounts. You have 4 SDRs. Some reps say, let's give 2,000 accounts to each SDR. I think that's a bad idea because it's too many accounts. They're going to be able to work them properly. So what do? I start with letter A and I assign 50 accounts per SDR. And then every week, I top off the ones that have trickled out. If they book a demo, that account is done, right? If somebody says, we're working with your competitor, we just signed a contract last week, that account is done. You don't want to keep emailing and calling everybody at that account. And there's other circumstances. Hey, we're getting acquired. Call us in a year. That account is done. So as a leader, what you got to do is assign 100 accounts to each rep, but then on their one-on-ones or on a weekly or bi-weekly cadence, ask them, how many of these accounts have you finished working, and can I top off your accounts? So then you give them another 20, another 10, another 20, another 10, and you keep topping off. And then every 2 or 3 months, I look at how many total accounts has Johnny worked versus Jessica versus Jennifer versus Jonathan. And then I go to Jonathan, I'm like, hey, dude, by the way, you've worked more accounts than anybody else. Have you also booked more demos than anybody else? What's your efficiency? And that really builds, a perfect system. They're never email blasting the hell out of people because their accounts are going to be taken away too soon. They're never like overworking the leads over and over and over again because they're not getting enough leads back. So that could
Mhm.
be a whole other webinar. I can teach you all the systems you need to have in place and all that. But hopefully that's a good answer. I know there's another question about kind of like SDR follow up, but I don't think that's the topic of this webinar, so I'm going to skip that. I really want to get back to, hey, I'm an SDR. I want to know if my team is going to grow or if my team is going to get destroyed and be shut down, or what's happening in this pandemic. Lots of people losing their jobs, other teams hiring very quickly. Where do I go? How do I think about it? So if we go back to thinking about the $134,000 you can spend for the $100,000 of revenue you're going to produce, you're the SDR portion of it. I'm going to give you some like very quick guesstimates of where I think sales development, how much a sales development team might cost, and
Mhm.
therefore how much they need to produce. We're going to consider for this example, they're only working cold outbound leads. 0% of your leads are going to be marketing generated. Then we're going to add the marketing generation part. We're going to increase the numbers because there's an extra expense there. But to simplify the process, we're just going to say you're an SDR, you're paired with an AE, all your accounts are cold, there's no marketing expense so far. How much do you need to spend? I'm also going to, in this specific case, I'm going to use an SDR based in an expensive city, call it New York or San Francisco, where your OTE might be somewhere between 75 and 90K. We're going to just call it 80 to make it easy. So your OTE is 80K, and we're going to assume you're hitting it. And we're going to assume your AE is hitting their numbers too. When you start looking at these numbers in this way, and it would be a longer exercise to really run through every, you know, field on an Excel sheet and do it, an 80K SDR, you need to add taxes and benefits to him to get his final compensation and overhead and all that, which is about a 40%. So it's going to take you to about 112K. On top of those 112K, you need to add a little bit of like tools and other expenses you might have. So call it like 125, 130K for that SDR. And then finally, you need to add management. And even if you're an early stage startup and you don't have like a manager per se that is a sales development manager, you're still reporting to some VP of sales, to some VP of marketing, to somebody who's spending valuable time with you.
Mhm.
So you are probably going to be like 150 to 160K total as a sales development expense. The difference between having you in this company or not having you in this company at the end of the day is going to be about 160K. Before a lead gets closed, though, you also need to pass it to an account executive. And when you start doing like the high level overview math of how account executives get compensated, usually their OTE is maybe 5x their um their OTE, right? So their quota is 5x their OTE. So if somebody has a 750K quota, their probably their OTE is about 150K. If they have $1 million quota, their OTE might be 200K. And on average, account executives don't hit their numbers. They're usually going to be 10, 15, 20% below as a team.
Hmm.
And therefore, your final cost, if we're thinking $1 million in revenue, the cost of those AEs might be like 220K or 250K in terms of their OTE, like how much they're actually receiving. So to that, you add the 40% taxes and benefits. So the final kind of like portion cost of revenue for an AE might be about 35 to 40%. Right? Hopefully the math is kind of like making sense for people, right? So $1 million in sales, if you're gonna produce that through your account executives,
Mhm.
even though their quota might be a million and their total OTE might be 200K, because they're not hitting it, that $1 million in quota requires more than one AE, and therefore your costs are going to be like 350K. And then on those 350K, you got to add your taxes, benefits, insurance, and overhead, which is about 40%, which is another like 15K or whatever else. So at the end of the day, We look at those. For every 100K you sell, you're going to spend 134K. Your AEs might take about 40% of that portion in the early stages of a startup, and truly, or 40K or 45K of that 134, and then truly your SDRs are taking the 80K,
Mhm.
80K to produce 100K. And if you translate if you translate that math to the actual cost of an SDR, we're estimating an SDR cost about 180K. You truly need to produce about 25% more than your cost, right? Than your fully loaded cost. And therefore, as an SDR, if you're only working outbound deals, if you're producing about 250K in sales on a year, you're doing great and your team is doing great. Now, for each company, you got to look at the context, right? If your average deal size is 50K, you need 5 deals. If your average deal size is 250K, if you can just get one deal a year, you're good. You've covered your cost. And the more you can get, the better your team is likely to do. So that's a little bit of like guesstimation, high level overview math for how much you need to produce. Now, remember the one very important fact. We're talking here about cold outbound leads. And what that means is there's no marketing expenses. If you produce 250K in sales, but, you know, oh yeah, I closed 5 deals worth 50K, or I sourced 5 leads closed worth 50K each. But 3 of those leads came from inbound demo requests. Remember that if we go back to this graph, the amount of effort that we can attribute to the SDR, right, is not the 80%, but it's just 8%. There's probably a lot of cost in marketing to produce those inbound leads. So your baseline as an SDR is you got to produce 250K if you're working cold outbound. And if you're having some of those warmer leads, I'd say 350K. 350, 400K. If any SDR here is producing like 700K, $1 million a year in revenue, you're absolutely killing it. You can expect your team to skyrocket and grow like crazy. And if you like are producing lots of meetings, but when you look at your data, your team is really not even closing 150 or 200K worth of revenue from the meetings you're producing, probably your team is not going to grow, or like you need to iterate and improve and change things and really try to maximize the amount of revenue you're getting, because that amount is therefore not sustainable.
Hmm.
Questions on that? I hope I haven't confused the hell out of people here
No, no,
as we've
no.
gone far into the math.
Uh, so to kind of scale back, one of the questions we have is talking about like investing in different tools, and if we're looking at like how much we need to actually be making to cover these costs, what what tools would you say are worth the extra costs that they need to consider, whether it be CRMs or like an email management tool? What would you suggest are kind of like those baseline, you should always bake this cost into whenever you're looking at your finances?
Yeah, I think any team that is experienced is likely going to go for all the best tools they can buy. I
Mhm.
do that myself for sure with our team. Like we have outreach and we have chorus and Zoom licenses and all that. We really want to eliminate all the friction. And the way I think about it is pretty simple. I say like some people are like, oh, but Tito, I could just run my demos on Google Hangouts for free. Why would I pay for Zoom? And I can just tell you that like Google Hangouts doesn't seem enterprisey, and like it's not like you're not going to be able to close any deals, but if that loses your conversion rate by 1% or 3% or 5% or whatever tiny amount it is, because 2 clients out of the 100 meetings you had didn't like it, and there were another 5 that were like kind of like meh about the fact that you don't have the right tools, they might perceive you as cheap or whatever else, and you might just lose a deal or two. And if you lose one deal worth 50K because you didn't want to
Mhm.
invest in Zoom that was $15 a license, you're crazy, right? Similarly, on like the Zoom Info side of things, or like some of these expensive lead tools, I have Zoom Info, I have Lucia, Lead IQ, DataFox. We use lots of tools, and the reason is I literally did an analysis, and I was like, how many more phone numbers or how many more prospects direct dials am I going to find if on top of Zoom Info and Lead IQ I add Lucia, right? And the answer was like another 17%. And then I thought about it, I was like, okay, I'm going to get 17% more cell phone numbers, I'm probably
Mm-hmm.
going to get maybe 10% more demos. That's another 10 demos a year. I value my demos at $5,000 a piece. That's 50 grand. How much is Lucia going to cost me? For the package I need, just 20 grand. I'm going to buy it.
Yeah.
Why not? It's worth it. So I say if you have an effective team, right? You always got to work on your biggest weakness. Is what I say in sales development. If you have one area that you suck at, it doesn't matter how good you are at everything else. That area that you suck at might destroy you. And let me give you an example. Like, imagine you have like all the perfect leads, but you suck at cold calling. Like, it doesn't matter how good the phone numbers are. If like when people pick up the phone, like, oh, hello, sorry to interrupt your day. Like, uh, I know you don't want to talk to me, whatever, or like you get super nervous or just don't know what to say. You don't have a script. You don't know how to present your product, and your cold calling doesn't work well. Then chances are that doesn't matter how good your leads are, you're still going to fail. So you got to figure out what is the area that you are having trouble with compared to other kind of like other companies or industry benchmarks, and try to improve whatever you think has the biggest area of improvement.
Yeah, that's really great. Um, Especially it kind of goes that old adage, right, of you gotta spend money to make money, and if you're really doing the math but I also think there's something to be said though, Tito, that you do really well that not everyone does, and that's understanding how much each lead costs and what, like, that big picture cost is, and so I think that's definitely a big takeaway that we all needed to really hone in on is how much are we paying per lead? And that's looking at the total cost. And if we're able to spend 60K, but we're basically guaranteeing if we only did this little bit amount of work with this lead service or with this tool, and we could make 100K, wouldn't that extra 40K difference like be worth it? And so understanding like as a company, what are those measurements for yourself and as a company and as a team that's going to help you understand what is worth it and what's not. And I think something to be said as well, one of the things we are talking about is what are either some good signs that, hey, as a rep, your team's going to be growing and you know you're at the right spot versus, oh, I don't know if I'm at the right spot. Look at the tools and look at what the company is willing to invest in yourself, right? I know, Tito, your reps, there's incredibly low churn, if any, because you really do invest. You really do put the time and effort into making sure that they have the tools they need to be successful. And as a rep, if your management isn't doing that, figure out why. Is it because they want to keep that like low cost of acquisition basically, or is it because like they don't have money? And both of those are incredibly worrisome signs for me. What do you think, Tito?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And here's the way I think about like company growth and venture-backed companies, right? We're talking about companies that are going to IPO and so on. So if you're in a venture-backed company and you're fast growing, there's a lot of pressure to grow. I almost call it like I many times call it the race to revenue, right?
Mm,
And if you're going to go and run a race, you got to be smart and really buy the right tools and over invest in like things that are going to provide value long term. Like cold calling training. If you don't know how to do cold calling training, if you don't have an expert in house, you gotta hire somebody from the outside or bring him in or start building the motions, right? A lot of times I explain to some of my clients that come to have help have us help them build their sales development team that when you're when you don't have a lot of knowledge in the industry, sometimes they come to us, they go to other sales development companies, and they're comparing us in like very basic things. So imagine you're gonna go run a race. It's a car race. You're gonna hop in a car and drive, and you're trying to win the race. And you're comparing like a McLaren, a Ferrari, and a Volkswagen. And the Volkswagen is way cheaper, right? And if your evaluation is like, okay, steering wheel, Ferrari, yes, McLaren, yes, Volkswagen, yes, pedals, yes, 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 speedometer, yes, 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 yeah. Of course they all check all the boxes, but the boxes you're looking at don't make sense. Like, we really need to go dive deeper on is, hey, that engine, how does it work? Why does this car have more power? Why
mhm.
is the balance better? What is it going to guarantee? What's my 0 to 60? What is that being powered through? What's my gas mileage and whatever else. Like, you got to really look at much deeper things than just this surface level. Like, I can guarantee you, outreach is not the same as yesware. It's
Mhm.
just not. Now, if you look at outreach and yesware and you're like, they look the same to me, you just don't understand sales enablement enough, and you got to educate yourself more. I think it's worth it at that point to go pay a consultant or pay somebody to come teach you the advanced methods, attend more webinars, learn more about how to use it. Because I can guarantee you, no race car driver thinks that a Ferrari and a Volkswagen are the same thing. Just it's not the case. And anybody who thinks of the Volkswagen, it's the same but cheaper, um, is doomed for failure. Like, you're just not going to get the results. So keep up leveling your skills and keep over investing. We think that the biggest investment you can make in 2020, we're just doing an analysis. We sourced 87% of our meetings through the phone,
Hmm.
which is absolutely crazy, right? A lot of people are email only or they're email blasting a lot. And I think, especially in 2020, I'm getting more emails than ever. And I still respond to the same number of emails. I might respond to 27 emails a day, but now I'm getting 400 rather than 150. And what that means is that the open rates and reply rates continue to go lower and lower and lower. And therefore, you just need to find the path where you're getting less attention. Like, how many phone calls do you get versus how many emails do you get per day? Right?
Yeah. Any suggestions on a specific cold call training, training in general that you would recommend, best practices for that?
I don't know if there's a paid good cold calling training that I'm aware of. But it is your lucky. It's a lucky question because if you find me on YouTube, I have something called, I think it's called cold calling trainings, and I have about 8 of them. And sometimes people email me and they're like, "Hey Tito, I love to do a cold calling training," and I say, "I'll do it for free if you let me record it and post it on YouTube." So it's either me or one of my managers. I have a few people at the company now that are really good trainers, and they just teach you the basics, right? How do you start the call? Do you start the call with, "Hey, this is John calling from X. Do you have did I catch a good time?" Or, "How are you doing today?" Or, "How have you been?" There's all these camps. There's all these people. Or like, "Can I take 37 seconds to tell you why I'm calling?" Like, there's different leaders that have tried different things and that like different things, and they might work for them. I can tell you that calling an engineer versus calling a VP of sales is very different. What works on engineers doesn't work for VPs of sales. So what you really got to do is, I recommend going and checking out those cold calling trainings, figure out like what my methodology is, or our methodology is, and how it works, how we start the call, how we explain the product, how we ask questions, what sorts of questions we ask, how do we align the stars, how do we get people close. And at the end of the day, it's just testing things out. Like, go and like make a bunch of phone calls, get 30 people to pick up the phone. That might take a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Get 30 people to pick up the phone and start the call with like, "Hey John, this is Tito from AltiSales. I was hoping to speak with you briefly. Do you have 2 minutes?" And
Mhm.
then make another set of calls to get 30 people to pick up the phone. And when they pick up the phone, you say, "Hey John, this is Tito from AltiSales. How have you been?" And see what percentage of people say, "Good, how are you?" or whatever. And if they allow you to continue to your pitch, if you say, "Hey, I'm calling because we are a company dedicated to doing XYZ 1, 2, 3, and I was wondering how are you currently managing your systems," or whatever else you're asking, right? Just check your conversions. And if you start checking your conversions at each step of the call, you'll start figuring out what tends to work best for you rather than following Josh Brown, who has incredible content for a couple of months, and then 100% on his camp. And then you're like, "Oh man, that didn't work for me. Now I'm going to go just 100% John Barrows." And then that might not work for you. And then, "Oh, I'm going to go 100% Keenan." That might not work for you. 100% Tito. That might not work for you. So you got to, what I recommend is, I don't think all my methods are the perfect for everybody. But I think that if you look at a little bit of what we do and a little bit of what John Barrows does and a little bit of what Keenan does and a little bit of what Josh Braun does, I know he's doing a webinar with Sales Hacker soon, you're going to be able to piece together what are the little elements that are working the best for you. And that goes for both calls and emails and LinkedIn and everything else.
So, for those of you that are curious about this, I already put the YouTube link in the chat. And please go check it out. I just kind of scrolled through it a little bit, and you get to see Tito up to 5 years ago from his TEDx speech at Duke.
That's
So
crazy.
you get to learn
You should not
from the
watch that.
very beginning.
I should definitely delete all those. You should only put the videos that are the cold calling training. Come on,
Well,
Katie.
there's so many. You have so many great videos on there that I just think everybody should look at anyways. But, as we kind of finish up here, I would love for us to hit on and I think this kind of dovetails into whenever we talk about revenue operations, maximizing efficiency and scaling up. What would you say are maybe, we probably only have time for 3 takeaways or 3 key points on looking at our sales teams? How do we know when we should maximize efficiency? How do we know whenever we should cut it? And how do we know whenever we should really scale up?
Yeah. Before we dive into that, as people click on that link for YouTube and you get to my channel, you can just click on playlists, and you'll see that I have them very well organized. So you can now go and start finding things that I've watched and learned from. There's the favorite playlist, which includes talks from like Mark Roberge and other leaders, and then you also see the where do I have it? There should be a cold calling superstar SDRs cold calling training. It's at the bottom. There's like 6 talks there, or six trainings there from a few years ago. But the methodology is very similar. And then as we jump now into like some of the takeaways or some of the things to think about it here, I'll say it's for everybody, both for leaders and for SDRs. Like the final metric you want to look at, if you want to dive deeper, find David Skalk and find all his data. You can do the cohort analysis of all the revenue metrics that you need to hit. But I would say if your SDRs are working cold leads and are able to produce like 250K or 300K plus in revenue per year, you have a team that you should continue to grow and scale. You are doing really, really well. If there's somewhere between the 100K and 300K, there's things to iterate on, and you need to be more efficient, and then you'll be able to scale further. And if you're under 100K for the year, your team is probably like really not working. There's something that's completely off. And again, many times you can get, when people ask me, what are the 3 key things to get sales development right? I tell them, unfortunately, that's an impossible thing to answer, because
Mhm.
sales development is one of those things that there's like 100 things you got to do. And if you do 85% of them well and 15 you do poorly, you'll be an okay team. If you do 90 well and 10 poorly, you'll be a really good team. If you do 95 well and 5 poorly, you're an incredible team. So unfortunately, I kind of give you like 3 things that you gotta do, or 3 takeaways, or the 3 things, because there's just so many little things.
Mhm.
And the one thing that a lot of people overlook, and a very, very common problem though, is as your SDRs go outbound and they start hunting for deals, outbound sourced meetings have an extra step in the sales process, which is the educational call. We call the illumination call. You do your data research to find your buyer personas. That's step number 1. You do your outreach through phone, email, LinkedIn, and all that. You get meetings on the calendar. The third step is to make sure that when you hop on that meeting as an AE, or your sales team, when your AEs hop on that meeting, they're not asking, hey, what's the problem you're trying to solve? You call them. They
Mhm.
didn't call you. They don't have a problem yet. You gotta run what I call an illumination call. You gotta teach him that the way they're running things today isn't the best way, and there's a better way, right? And to do that, you gotta ask some situational questions, and then share some best practices. So when I ask a team, hey, so you guys are doing sales development, what sort of tools are you guys using? They're like, oh, I'm on Yesware. I'm like, cool, awesome. How about your CRM? They're like, oh, we're just we don't have a great CRM. We're on Pipedrive. Ah, okay, fair enough. A lot of people are still that way. That's totally fine. And how long are your sequences within Yesware? Like how many calls, how many emails? No, we don't make any calls. I say, oh wow, that's very interesting. Let me share with you some of the best practices for the best sales development teams. They have outreach. They have a lot of data coming from Salesforce. It flows directly into custom fields within outreach, so the emails are hyper personalized without much effort. So it would take much less time for your SDRs, and then they focus a lot on cold calling, and for that they're buying Zoom Info and Lucia, and they're doing this and that, and now their SDRs are averaging 8 cold outbound meetings per month, plus another 4 inbound meetings or warm leads. How about your team? Where you guys are at? And he's like, oh my god, we only have 2 meetings per month. I'm like, okay, now this is interesting. If my team's averaging 12 and you're averaging 2, I can do it with 1 SDR. What do you do with 6? Would it be worth investing in improving the efficiency of your team? Of course it will, because 6 SDRs is so expensive. It's much more expensive than spending the money on outreach and Zoom Info and Lead IQ and Lucia and Zoom and Chorus and all the tools that you need, and really creating the right flow. So
That's great. I know we've only got a few minutes, so if there's anything else that you want to touch on before we end, this is your time for it.
cool. And as we wait for that, if people want to put more stuff in Q&A, I'll answer one of the questions that we have here, which is, can you walk me through the best practices for SDRs, following up on warm inbound leads, cadence messaging, so on and so forth. So I'll tell you that I divide the world in 3 buckets. I divide it into inbound, warm outbound, and cold outbound. The inbound leads are only things that require immediate attention. So those are demo requests, contact us forms, and chat. Nothing else do I consider inbound. Because literally the prospect isn't expecting you to reach out to them unless they've done a demo request, an inbound contact us form, or a chat. That I dedicate a person to, or somebody that's really paying attention to it. Then I have the warm outbound. The warm outbound is everybody who's interacted with my content but hasn't requested a demo. This is somebody who's attended a webinar. Like, I'm not the type of person who emails webinars from Sales Hacker, so all the attendees here, you're not going to get an email from me, but a lot of companies do, especially when they run their own webinars. They'll email you white paper downloads, any gated content, anything like that. And then that conversation is a little bit different, and that requires a different type of cadence. And then the cold outbound requires also a different type of cadence. Cold is obviously they never heard of you. So on the contact us forms, I don't think you even need much of a cadence. You just need somebody to be paying attention to it and respond as quickly as possible. Don't ask too many questions. Just research their website, research their LinkedIn profile as a company and as a prospect. And if they fit the ICP, just book a meeting. It's usually worth it. On the warm outbound, I usually run it through some engine. Like, you need lean data. You need to do a little bit of lead scoring. Is it the right person? Is this the right account? Do they have enough people? Blah, blah, blah. And if so, you put it on a cadence. And your cadence, I would not mention the cadence that you're reaching out because they interacted with content. Nobody likes it. When somebody tells me, I'm emailing you because you attended a webinar, I'm like, delete. Because I know it's generic messaging for everybody who attended the webinar. But if you tell me, Tito, I love AltiSales because X, Y, and Z, and I also see you attended the webinar, I thought it'd be the perfect time to reach out. We're doing personalized screen shares, or we're doing some demos showcasing how the best companies like X, Y, and Z are doing blah, blah, blah. That's much better. So my warm outbound messaging is much more similar to my cold outbound messaging than it is to my inbound. You attend a webinar, I'm not like, hey, you attended a webinar. But if you send me a contact us form, I'm like, hey, here's some links to book time because you sent us a contact us form. Right? That's obvious and easy. So yeah, you gotta sell the value of the conversation. You gotta sell the value. They're gonna learn something by meeting with your AE.
So I think you just hit on something really interesting, and that is, in like, to put context with it, everyone's always talking about you have to sell the value, right? You gotta sell the value, But I love how you're taking a step further and saying you have to sell the value of the meeting, right? Not just what this product can do and not the problems it can solve, but like, why should I even give you my time, especially if you're interrupting my day, you're reaching out to me, what is going to make my life better by us having this conversation. So I absolutely love that. One last question that I just think is a really great one. What do you think is better to invest in, people versus tools?
I think you got to invest in both. And then when you say people versus tools, sometimes it's like training, right? On
Mhm.
training, it might be people, but you also can't train without the tools. Like if you don't do calls and call recordings, I can't train my SDRs and on how to better cold call if I don't have the call recordings.
Yep.
So definitely need the call recordings. Now, if the only thing I have is call recordings, and I don't have somebody who's a trainer and can listen to the call recordings and spend the time to train the people, um, I'm also like doomed for failure, right? So you both need the tools and the people who can utilize the tools and really get the full capacity. I'll give you one last example because you were saying that what was the last point you were making? Oh, they get to sell the value of the meeting, right?
Mhm.
And I think that is just so important. And a good example I give him is imagine you're Coca-Cola. Like, why would a VP of marketing at Coca-Cola take a meeting with you?
Yeah.
The only reason they would take it is because they think they can learn something. Now, what would be the best thing they could ever learn for which they would 100% for sure take a meeting with you? If you're the VP of marketing at Coca-Cola and I call you and I tell you, hey, Katie, I have some insights regarding how Pepsi is running their marketing campaigns in 2021. Would you like to hear about
Absolutely.
them? Of course.
Pepsi.
How could I not? It's my freaking competition, and you know how they're going to run marketing in 2021, and you're going to tell me for free? I'm fucking paying millions of dollars for that information. So remember that you got to figure out what's valuable to your prospects, and usually, regardless of what you're prospecting for, what's valuable for your customers is understanding how either their competition or companies similar to them are running certain processes. It's not about the tools they're using. It's about what the process is,
Mhm.
right? If you are whatever company, a cybersecurity company, and your competition is in cybersecurity, is using some tool for sales development, which gives them intent data, I guarantee you that if you call their VP of marketing, like, hey man, I work with Palo Alto Networks, and I want to show you how they're using intent data to better target leads, which is helping them source about $7 million in revenue per year. Not sure if it'd be relevant at all for you, but I thought I'd ask. They're gonna be like, wait, what? My competition is getting $7 million worth of revenue from what? I want to look at that. And of course, make sure that when they show up to the meeting, your AE doesn't just start the call with like, "So, what problem are you trying to solve?" Right? The conversation should be like, "Hey, I know we reached out to you. I know we would say we'd share some insights regarding how other cybersecurity companies are running, blah blah blah. Sure, one of our customers is XYZ, which is a competitor of yours. I will obviously not be able to share any uh, important or like personal information about them, but I can tell you about how approximately they're running their strategy. And if you like it, maybe we are also another great tool you could potentially use to run a
Mhm.
very similar strategy and get similar results. I guarantee you that VPs and C levels are going to take meetings because just like you joined this webinar to learn something about CAC payback periods and revenue metrics and how much revenue you need to get, blah, 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 blah. All the people you're calling or emailing are also interested in learning about something themselves.
Yeah.
You just got to figure out what do they want to learn and how can you deliver that to them.
I love that. Wow, that is such a strong sentiment to end on. I know we're a little over time. Tito, this was absolutely amazing. People are wondering, though, and this has been a very common question. I know that you pulled some slides. How can they get those slides? Do they just need to message you on LinkedIn for them?
I can send them over to you. I don't know if you want to. Can we post them somewhere? Should we mass email everybody? I don't know. I don't care. Whatever people prefer.
Okay, well, we'll figure out how to send them, but you will get them because everyone's been asking about them. This has been an amazing hour, Tito. Thank you so incredibly much. I know I learned so much about what to look for, how to figure out what customer acquisition costs really are. And it sounds like a lot of people are adding you on LinkedIn, so keep an eye out for that. But thank you all so much for joining. We have another fabulous webinar with Josh Braun on Thursday. They're going to be going over some objections. But for today, I think that's all we have. Thank you so much, Tito, for joining us.
Yeah. No. Thank you. Thanks everybody for attending, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Bye.